All right, good evening and welcome to a special broadcast of True Story Live. Tonight is Testimony on Thursday. It's funny because this is very much what I wanted True Story Live to be about in the first place, which is true stories and people sharing their true stories with us. And it kind of morphed into something else that I still always wanted to be true. But when we first started on Blog Talk and we were trying to get people to call in and have conversations with us and just share their stories with us, we found that people had a lot more trouble sharing their stories, especially when it's recorded and there's people listening. We would get a lot of people that would comment or send an email saying, tell our story, tell our story. But that's not really what I wanted. I wanted people to tell their own story and have it be live. And so it's funny that we don't normally do testimonies. We've done a few. But for tonight, Paula is willing to tell us her story and her testimony. Paula, for those of you that do not know, aside from just being a person all her own self, I don't know if that's proper grammar or not, but she's a person in and of herself. Let's say it like that. She's also married to Mathias from Talkin Doctrine, who's also part of this panel. So we also have with us Jen. Just Jen, say hello to everyone.
Sorry, I have toast in my mouth again.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Bye. I'm gonna chew now.
So go ahead and chew because I'm gonna call on you again. I'm sure as we're getting this thing started. But Jen had shared with me a little over a week ago about Paula and just saying that she wished she knew her more. And she wished that, she knew her story and wished that she could have conversations with her and things like that. And I've been wondering for a long time, as much as Mathias mentions Paula, why she hasn't been more vocal. And then I talked to her once or twice, I think, in preparation to do the Monday's Milk. And I think she's delightful. She may not see herself that way, but that's just my impression of her. So for tonight, it is a special broadcast where we're going to get to talk to Paula and we're going to get to hear her story. It's going to be painless and effortless. And as are most people that have never done anything like this, she might be a little bit nervous, but we're going to be understanding of that. So we'll just say hello to Paula. Paula, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for asking. We're glad to have you, and we're glad that you decided to kind of get this ball rolling with you being more vocal sometimes. And very grateful you decided to come on TSL. So thanks for that.
Oh, well, all glory to God, because, Mathias has been asking me if I wanted to get on and give my testimony, or when I had something to say, I would, whisper it to him or slip him a note or something.
Yeah.
And every time he asked me, I would just, oh my gosh, my heart would just start racing and I would start sweating a little bit. So
Sure.
So, but I did want to give my testimony. So I asked God to kind of set it up. And the only thing that I would ask is that he gave me a calm spirit about it. Mm-hmm. And I am a slightly nervous little bit, but not like it was before when the opportunity arose. So
praise God. Well, we're grateful that you're here and we welcome you. Jen's here also just because she had mentioned that she wanted to get to know you better, and she's a part of our panel here on TSL. So we might be hearing her if she has a question along the way. The way I like to do things is just start out a little bit by giving people kind of a little bit of history about where you're born, where you grew up, and then eventually get to, during those periods of time, what your feelings were about God. How often did you hear about him? What were your attitudes about him? And then lead into how you came into a relationship with him. And you can tell that any way you like. And I may add questions or help along the way if I have something that comes to mind that maybe I think people would want to know about. But other than that, it'll just be you telling your story, and I'll try not to interrupt.
All right. Well, I was born in 1973 to a single mother, and I have an older brother.
Oh,
My mom was not religious at all. The first time I ever heard about God and Jesus was from the kids at school. For some reason, they were talking about them, and everybody seemed to know who these people were.
hmm
And they were using their names interchangeably. And I didn't say anything. But when I got home, I asked my mom, who is God and who is Jesus?
mm,
And she said, well, God is this entity or being that some people believe created everything, but there's no scientific proof to prove that.
okay.
And she said that Jesus was a guy who lived a long time ago who came and said that he was the Son of God. But again, there's no proof of that either.
hmm
So that was my foundation for life, I guess.
Okay.
And I was really inquisitive as a child. I kind of, looking back, I was kind of philosophically minded because I wanted to know what life was all about. I didn't get it. I didn't understand what the point was.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was learning about evolution, and it's presented as fact. So I just assumed that this was scientific fact, that they've proven it.
Right.
And my mom was definitely science-minded as well. So I didn't get the point of life. It
Right.
just kind of seemed pointless if there was nothing behind it and no purpose to it.
Sure.
But two things I did notice when I was little, when I would play out in the woods, I would pretend to be like an early hominid creature, and
Oh,
I would gather all this stuff and pretend like I had to survive out in the woods.
hunt and
And I
gather.
thought what's that?
Hunt and gather.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's what I was being taught, that
Sure.
that's where we came from.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that everything I needed to survive could be found in nature.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I noticed was that there was nothing superfluous in nature. Like everything had a purpose.
Wow, that's good.
And even when it died, it provided nutrients to the next life. And I just thought that was so perfect. Like,
Yeah.
how could evolution, if it doesn't have intelligence behind it, do something like that? But
Wow.
I definitely wasn't going to believe in God because it was always presented to me as a fairy tale.
Sure. And not just you, but to everyone. Like you said earlier, it was presented to you as fact, evolution.
Right.
Yeah.
And even on all the, I was raised kind of in front of the television a lot, and most of what I learned came from TV.
Oh, sure.
And even in the shows that you watch, anything about animals or history or anything, evolution is always thrown in there as if it's fact. So
Absolutely.
when it's constantly being reinforced, you don't even ever question it.
Right.
So when I was about 9, we had to move to my grandparents down south because we were living in Panama City at the time.
Sure.
And my granny wanted to take me to church. And at first, my mom was really against it. And after a while, she let me start going with her.
Okay.
And I really liked it. I liked that all these families got together and the kids ran around. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever heard the gospel necessarily when I was there,
Okay.
but I do remember them talking about the blood and how gross that was when I first heard it. I didn't get it.
Yeah.
All I knew from blood was like horror movies. And
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard for a 9-year-old to grasp, I think, too, even. I mean, even though I'm sure you're fairly intelligent at that time, it's hard to grasp that just from hearing it. But but you delighted in the socialization, the meeting other kids and being in that atmosphere.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was great that these people like were good or trying to be good in
Trying to be
life.
good. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because my childhood was not, I didn't see any good.
Right.
So when I started going to church, I just thought it was really sweet. And
Okay.
when I would get home, I would ask my granny all these questions like, how could Adam and Eve have all these kids, you know, and where are the dinosaurs in the Bible? And she really didn't know how to answer my questions. I'm sure she did the best that she could.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember her saying, well, you just have to have faith. You just have to have faith. And I would think, well, how can I have faith in something I don't believe? And the answer is you can't. So to me, what I thought faith was just believing in something because it made things seem better than they were.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when I got older, I heard this quote from Mark Twain. He said, faith is believing what you know ain't so.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that.
And that's kind of how I thought it was.
Okay.
So then when I was 16, me and my girlfriend were in Wendy's, I think, and these people came in, and it must have been a Sunday because they were all dressed up, and I don't know what kind of mood I was in at the time, but for some reason I turned to this guy and I said, hey, how you doing? And, you know, just trying to be a jerk. And he was like, I'm doing wonderful. How are you? And I was like, I'm good. I was like, why are you so happy?
Yeah.
And he said, why don't you come by my table when you're done eating and I'll tell you.
Okay.
I was like, all right. I'm thinking creeper. You
Yeah.
know, my friend's like, let's just leave.
Right.
So eventually I did go over to his table and he gave me the gospel. And, you know, I believed him in that moment. I knew I was a bad person. I knew that I had sinned. I felt bad for my sin. I believed him when he was telling me about what Jesus did and everything. And, you know, he said a prayer with me. He declared me saved. And then he kind of sent me on my way. And my friend was like, what was that all about? Because she didn't come to the table with me. And I was like, nothing.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. I just kind of kept it to myself.
Sure.
And then as I went on in life, nothing in life was being confirmed. Like this guy, what he had told me, nothing in life was confirming it. Nobody was talking about God or Jesus or the Bible.
Right.
Nothing about it on television. Nobody said it on the news.
Right.
None of my friends talked about it. So eventually I just kind of blew it off and I thought, well, his little magic spell or whatever that's supposed to be, it just didn't work on me. And in my mind, I thought I had tried Christianity and that wasn't true.
Okay. Well, it tied right into your idea that
right. It just confirmed what I had been taught by my mother. And my mother's very smart, so I never questioned, you know, whether that was so. But then after that, it was pretty much confirmed.
Yeah. And going back to you saying that you were being taught this in TV and everywhere you looked. And so if you just accepted it for what it was at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I grew up and lived a pretty wicked life. I mean, I wasn't good. I never tried to be good.
Right.
I saw the world as dog eat dog. And
yeah,
if we're just animals, then, you know, morality really doesn't exist.
Right.
It doesn't really exist in the animal world. So that's how I thought about life. And, you know, honestly, that's what life confirmed to me. I never really saw anybody doing anything good or selfless. So
Right.
I became the product of my environment.
Sure.
And I remember when I was younger, I would, like I said, talk to my mom about all this stuff. And I would tell her, I'm going to find out the meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, Paula, there have been philosophers for thousands of years trying to find out the meaning of life. You'll never find it. And I was like, no, if there's some meaning to this life, I'm going to find it out. So I was looking into other, religions and other belief systems and stuff as I go along in life. And I was basically doing what the world says to do. The world says to follow your heart and to chase your dreams and to do whatever makes you feel good. And so when I was 17, I got engaged to this guy, and it was really a bad relationship. And I decided that I would never get married because I got really scared because I got so close to being married to this person who wasn't very nice.
Okay.
And then a friend of mine said, well, why don't you go to college? And after high school, and I was like, I can't go to college. I don't have any money. And no one had ever talked to me about college. So I started going to college, and then I met this guy, and he was a deadhead, and he took me to a concert, and I was like, that's it. I found out my meaning of life. I'm going to be a deadhead.
Oh, no. We have to.
Yeah, no, I was totally taken by it. I thought it was great.
We have to stop the broadcast now. I'm sorry. I can't deal with the fact that you were a deadhead, Paul. I just can't do it.
Only briefly.
Okay.
No, because
kidding.
the first tour I went on was the summer of '95, and I just thought it was great.
Yeah.
And that not too long after that, Jerry Garcia had died. So I was like, great, I'm not going to be a deadhead. Now what? And I had already got my associate's degree. So I thought, well, I'll go to school for psychology because that was something I was really interested in. Yeah. So I went to UCF, but only for a couple of months because I couldn't afford to go and feed myself and pay my rent and all that.
Sure.
So I dropped out, and then a few years later, I was like, well, I'll go to acting school.
Oh, wow. Yeah. We have a lot of similarities there, Paula.
Yeah, I know. That's why I kind of wanted to talk to you about that.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
And while I loved it, it was fun. I just thought, I don't want to do this for a living.
Oh, right.
Like constantly being out of work and going on auditions.
Yeah, you have to really want it. Like a lot of things in life, you have to really want it. But
and I didn't.
Yeah,
I thought I did, and then I got there, and I was like, maybe not.
Now, let me ask you about the acting real quick. Did it? Well, both things really. The psychology. Well, let's go back to the psychology first. Did you see anything in psychology that was interesting to you, or I understand the reasons why you didn't continue in that. You made those clear, but psychology itself, was there anything that attracted you to that, or anything that you learned during the time that you did take classes?
No.
Okay.
No, not in school. I learned a lot, and I was so fascinated with psychology because people are so interesting.
They are so interesting.
Yeah. They're very complex, and to really know a person is to hear their backstory, and someone you see as not a very nice person, when you get to know them a little better, you can kind of empathize with them, and you can kind of see why they are the way that they are. And I just thought it was fascinating. I still do. I still think psychology is very fascinating.
I do too. So then the acting.
Yeah, and the acting, I'm just a very bold and outgoing person, and
you are.
I am actually. I've heard Mathias say several times, "Oh, she's shy," and it's like
she does. That's his excuse. When I've said, "Why doesn't Paula comment?" He says, "Oh, she's shy."
Right. It's not that I'm shy. He knows that. It's that I was nervous to say anything. And that's actually part of the reason why I was nervous, is because I'm not shy. And sometimes I say things that are
bold,
a little too bold, maybe. Sometimes I get really passionate when I speak and people think I'm angry at them, or
Yeah, you're afraid to hurt people, right?
right.
So,
and plus, like with the acting thing, every guy I dated while I was in acting school, they just thought I was acting all the time. Nobody believes you.
That's true. That's actually true. And there are particular actors, especially method actors, and you know them right away. They're the ones that while they're rehearsing and whatnot, they get it. They stay in character the whole time. And some of them, even when they're not on stage or not even rehearsing, they're really, really getting into this character, and they treat everyone like crap if it's a villain. They treat everyone kindly if it's a hero. But yeah, that's not my style of acting. Not that it matters, but I literally would just, you give me a script and I put on the character, and then when it's over, it's over. I'm not a method actor. But anyway, so people have trouble believing you when you're in acting to begin with, because they never know when you're acting and when you're being straight.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it for the fact that I mean, I did like it. It was kind of a high, like when you would leave the theater at the end of the night, everything was illuminated and everything seemed alive. It was very much like a drug. But you could lose yourself really easily in these characters that you play. And I certainly wasn't stable, so I just thought that was probably not the best career choice.
Okay. Now, did you get a chance, before we move forward, and this is fascinating to me, and we'll talk about it another time, but did you ever get to be on stage or be in a play or anything, or did you just take the classes?
No, I did a few like commercial spots for this car dealer. Like they would come in and just have the acting students do free work for them, basically.
Oh, sure. That's way.
But no, I didn't get very far. I took maybe 3 semesters of it.
Okay.
Before I decided. I didn't have that desire that everybody else had. Everybody had this look in their eye, like they were willing to do whatever it took to. And I was like, yeah, I'm not into it that much. So
oh, that's hilarious, because I've seen that look too. These are the people that are willing to work backstage. They're willing to, be a stage manager. They're willing to pull the curtain, back and forth, and whatever the job is, these type of people, they are so into it. I mean, they'll do, as you say, whatever they have to do. That's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. So then at the age of 26, I was still living in Orlando. I decided my problem was that I needed to go see a psychotherapist to figure myself out, to fix myself. Because I found myself becoming a lot like my mom, who I didn't want to be that way. And so I started going to psychotherapy, and I only went for like 6 months because I couldn't afford it after that. It was pretty horrible, but I did learn a lot of things that I didn't notice. There's something about talking to someone and telling them things that you've never said to anybody. And they can help you see why you are the way that you are, why you do what you do, or whatever. So my next idea of the dream to chase, I was 28, and I decided to move out to Colorado to climb mountains.
Again, another similarity. I love Colorado.
Really? Wow. And while I liked it, I lived there for about 4.5 months. I hated the place I was living. It was so depressing. Everybody was so angry for some reason.
Yeah, Florida's
like. Where was this?
It was in Colorado Springs.
Oh, Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just didn't like it, and I thought, I don't want to do this. So a friend of mine's like, well, why don't you move to Texas?
Oh.
And I was like, okay. So I moved there for a little while and I made some money. And then my brother's like, well, why don't you move up to Michigan? So I moved up to Michigan for a day.
A day. That's where I'm from, by the way, Paul.
Oh, really?
I'm from Michigan.
Yeah, that's a long story.
Okay.
But as I was leaving Michigan, I stopped in a hotel room somewhere between Indiana and Illinois, and I sat on one of the double beds and I looked over at the nightstand, and I knew that there would be a Bible in there. And I just really didn't know where to go at this point. Should I go back to Florida or Texas or Colorado? And I picked up the Bible, and I had the Bible in my left hand and my cell phone in my right hand. And I just said, I'm not ready for you yet.
Wow.
And I put the Bible back in the nightstand, and I called my friend in Texas, and he's like, yeah, come on back,
Wow.
So
let me dig into that one comment just a little bit, Paul, if you don't mind. That's profound to me. Knowing where you are now and looking back to this time that you're sharing with us in a hotel room. You're saying to him, you're not ready for him right now.
Right.
Wow.
Because there was something about it. I instinctively knew that if I was going to go that way, that my life was not going to be my own anymore.
Wow.
I don't know how I knew that. Nobody told me that.
Oh, I believe it. I believe nobody told you. That's about as authentic as you can be. I mean, to be in that place and to intuitively know, or at least to you, it would be an intuition. But I believe that information came to you from a different source. That's just personally what I would believe.
Right. It had to have, because I don't know how I would have known that.
Right.
So I go back to Texas and I start, just working jobs. And then I thought, Dallas especially is very money centric. And I thought, maybe I was wrong, and maybe money can buy you happiness.
Yeah.
So I went after the money, and I made a lot of it. I worked for an oil company, and it was great. I never had money before because we grew up poor, and I was able to buy these things and pay off my school loan and pay off my Jeep. And it was great for a while. And then it wasn't. It just wasn't doing the same thing anymore. And
you mean the feeling of it?
Right.
The feeling of having money.
Right. The high wore off, because the more money that you make, you start hanging out with other people that have even more money than you do. And so making all this money made me think, how can I make more money?
Mm-hmm.
It was also like a drug. It was really weird. I was like, what are you saying? You have more money than you know what to do with now. Yeah. And all you can think about is making more of it. It was, I didn't like the way it was going. So one night I was sitting on my balcony in Texas, and I was just kind of going over everything in my life and the different avenues I had tried and how everything I got to. Like I did what the world said. I chased after my dreams, and when I was on the way to getting there, I realized I don't want this. This isn't what I want. It wasn't doing it for me, whatever that is. And so this is what I said. I was like, all right, God, if you're real, I give you my life. You do something with it, because I don't want to live anymore.
Oh, no.
And I said, and I was not suicidal by any means. I was way too curious about how this was going to end to be suicidal. But I had basically, he was my last resort, because I just didn't want to live anymore. And I said, and now I am talking to the God that supposedly created everything. I'm not talking to any other God or any other spirit, because I had dabbled in the New Age and I had prayed to the universe, and I had seen some things, and there was always a catch. There was something devious about it. So I specified that if this God were real, that was the one I was talking to.
How did you know to do that, Paula?
because I had prayed to the universe a couple of times for different things. And I'll give you a story. I prayed one time. I was living in this little crappy apartment in Orlando, and I had been learning about, I think it's called The Secret or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, where you like pray to the universe and you let it go. And so I had prayed to the universe for rent money because I didn't have any that month, and I needed like $350 or something like that. And it was way more than I had in my bank account. And so I prayed to the universe. And then a couple days later, I got a check in the mail from UCF that they said that I overpaid on one of my semesters. And it was almost exactly $350. So I was like, yay, thank you, universe, you know?
Yeah,
so
sure.
I was able to pay my rent. And then a couple days after that, they sent me another letter and said that, oh, we made a mistake. And yeah, we didn't owe you that money. You didn't overpay. So my bank ended up charging me like an overdraft fee, and I still owed the $350.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was. I was like, okay, I see how you are. There's like a catch. You can get what you want, but there's always a catch.
There is always a catch.
So I knew there was some sort of something out there, some spiritual something that I was dealing with that did give me what I wanted.
Yep.
Asterisk.
Yeah.
Because then.
Yes.
So I specified, and I told God, I said, if you tell me to join a convent tomorrow, I'll do it.
Okay.
If you're real. And that was kind of a big thing for me because I was
not a convent girl.
No.
Right.
Not at all.
Right.
So I was kind of still in this state of depression, and I said the prayer and I let it go. I forgot about it. And the next day I was hanging out with a friend of mine, and we had gone out to dinner, and I was getting in my Jeep to go home, and I realized I didn't have any weed at home because I had smoked weed at the time.
Sure.
And so I called my ex-boyfriend. I was like, hey, do you have any? And he's like, I do, but I'm not home right now. He's like, but you can call my roommate, and, you know, he has some, and he'll probably even smoke with you. He's a really nice guy. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And he's like, no, really, it's cool. And it was Mathias. And I had met him before through our mutual drug dealer one day. And I knew he was from Florida, and I knew he was roommates with my ex-boyfriend. And I thought he was cute, you know, and I kind of wanted to talk to him just because he was from Florida. So I was like, all right. So I went over to his house that night, and he was like a breath of fresh air.
Oh, really? Okay.
I felt like I had known him forever.
Interesting.
And I thought at first it was just that Florida vibe because we're very laid back here. We're kind of a flip-flop mentality.
Flip-flop, suntan, beer in a koozie, you know.
Right. And so I just thought the comfortableness was because of that.
Yeah.
But to make a long story short, you know, a couple months after we started dating, we were all coked up, and we decided it would be a good idea to have a baby.
Oh, great. That sounds like a good idea when you're all coked up.
Right. So
we could do this. We could do this.
It was sort of significant because I had never met anyone I wanted to blend my DNA with. And that's how I thought about it until I met Mathias. And so after we got pregnant, I was like, oh, crap, what have I done? And he was kind of in the same place because we didn't even really know each other. And, you know, I'm
the Florida vibe, right?
Right. And I'm like older than him. I'm 6.5 years older than him.
Okay.
And I was like, this kid is a bartender, and I just got knocked up, and I'm not a kid myself anymore, and I've just ruined my life. And so needless to say, it wasn't good, and we eventually broke up. I didn't want to be with him, and he didn't want to be with me.
Oh, wow.
And then soon before the baby was to be born, we decided to put aside our feelings for each other, or lack thereof, and just come together and raise her together, because he didn't want to be like a weekend dad, and And I didn't want that either because I never had a dad growing up. And I thought, well, I've just ruined my life and now I'm going to be responsible for someone else's life.
And that's scary. I mean, that's got to be scary.
It was. And I said, I just want to live for her at this point because, you know, she doesn't deserve this mess that I'm bringing her into.
Sure.
And so that's what we did. We stayed together. We didn't want to be with each other, but we stayed together anyway. And when she was about 6 months, we moved here to Milton, Florida, which I was so grateful for because I hated Texas and I didn't want to be there.
I understand why you would hate Texas. I've been there a few times. It's generally hot, and there are long, vast, open spaces of cattle fields and highway. I mean, it seems like that's all it is for huge portions of Texas.
Right. My biggest thing about Texas was just the mentality of the people. There was a lot of uplifting of artificial beauty in Texas.
Yeah.
And I think
yes.
Right, because the architecture, and there's a big art community there, and all the girls have makeup and their hair done and
fake boobs.
Right. It's
just to be honest. I mean,
that's very prevalent there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to move back to Florida, but I did not want to move back to where I grew up or anywhere around there.
Right.
So I was like, awesome, you know, Pensacola on the Panhandle, great, I'll be in Florida again. So when we moved here, Mathias started looking into some things because we were getting this house not built, but you know, the property and stuff, so the house could be brought in.
Sure.
And it started with the Federal Reserve, and he started realizing that what we're told is not the truth. And I knew something was really messed up about the world.
Yeah.
So when he started looking into this stuff, it just one thing led to another.
Yeah.
And we're learning about like who's running things. And we noticed that the deeper you dig, it seems like they all sort of have Lucifer as their guide or something. And I was like, why are they using his name and all these things? He's a cartoon character.
Sure. He's a guy in a red suit and horns and pitchfork.
Pointy tail, right.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, it's probably because he's a rebel or whatever. They're just using his name for the idea of who he is.
Sure.
And then we met some people through like the Ron Paul thing, and we were hanging out with them for months, and I didn't realize that these people were Christian.
Oh.
For the first couple of months we were hanging out with them.
Okay.
And one of our friends who had become a close friend at the time, he was coming over almost every day. Mathias said to me one day, he's like, did you know so-and-so's a Christian? Or no, he said, do you know so-and-so's really into God?
Oh, really into God, huh? Okay.
And I was like, what? And so I was waiting for this guy to come over. And this guy is a debater, man. He'll get into an argument with anybody.
Oh.
And man, I was waiting for him. I was ready. I mean, I was a out and proud atheist. I had a Darwin fish on the back of my Jeep, and
sure,
Darwin very vocal about my anti-godness.
Sure.
So I was ready for him, and he walked through the door, and I was like, "Hey, so and so." I said, how come you can be aware of all the stuff that's going on in the world, but yet you believe the Bible is true? Yeah. What's up with that?
What's up with that?
And he just kind of looked at me, and he had this sad look on his face, and he just put his head down and he kept walking.
What?
And I was shocked. I'm
shocked.
I was just dumbfounded. I was like, I was so ready for anything he had to say, but
yeah,
I didn't know what to do with the silence. It was almost like I felt like he was saying, this is too important to argue with you about.
Oh, wow.
And from that point, a lot of different things kept pointing me to Jesus as we're doing this research online and stuff and learning these things. And in October of 2009, my granny died, and we went down south to her funeral, and no one I knew had ever died before. I'd never been to a funeral. And so that started me thinking about God and life and death and stuff. And my mom gave me her Bible, and I would flip through it, and I would see that she had underlined and notes on everything. Like, she really read this thing. And so after the funeral, we got back home, and one day, my daughter, who was 2 at the time, Avery, I had scolded her about something, and she went into my bedroom, and after a few minutes, I walked in there, and she had gone into my closet and pulled out this tapestry that my granny had made. I had stuffed it way back in the closet. And she laid on the floor, and she was laying down on it. So I walked over to her, and I laid down on it with her. And as soon as I lay down, she pops up and she says, "Granny sees paradise." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Granny sees paradise." And I said, "My granny?" Because she calls Mathias's mom Granny also. And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you see my granny?" And she's like, "Yeah." And she's pointing to the corner of the room. And of course I didn't see anything. And I was just kind of like, okay. And I didn't say anything. And eventually she just started playing, and I thought, that's weird. Like, where would she hear a word paradise? Like paradise, right? We weren't Christians. I mean, and then I thought to myself, I was like, it's going to take a lot more than that to get me to believe in you. Because I had seen signs and wonders before. I knew something was going on. I knew there was some kind of spirit world. And then, and other things, like I saw the school bus go by, and I thought, oh, in a couple of years, I'll be putting her on the school bus. And then that thought just, I had so much anxiety, and I was like, no. And so I looked into homeschooling, and most Christians or most homeschoolers are Christians. So I was like, well, I'll just be a secular homeschooler.
Sure, why not, right?
But all these different things kept pointing to Jesus.
Wow.
And we had started watching this documentary called The Arrivals. And it's a very, very long time. It's probably 5 or 6 hours. And so we were watching like an hour or so every night. And it was made by a Muslim. And he was talking about a lot of interesting things, like Hollywood and different things that are going on there. And he was putting up verses from the Quran and verses from the Bible to sort of explain, this has been prophesied. And so as I was reading, because I'm reading both, because I don't know what the truth is at this point.
Right.
And I noticed that whenever I read the Bible verses, there was something like poetic about them. It was like poetry or something. I didn't understand what it was saying, but it was almost like it was alive. And then I would read the Quran verses that he put up, and they were flat. It was like a person had written them, and then something else wrote it. It was very weird. And this one night, Mathias is sitting at the kitchen table, and he has his laptop in front of him, and he's facing me, so I can't see what he's watching.
Okay.
But it was more of this documentary, and there was no sound or anything. I'm sorry, what?
I don't know what that was, but just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there was this music, this really ominous music that was coming from it. And I was sitting on the floor playing with Avery, and I was like, the music kept pulling me over there. And I thought, okay, I can either forget about all this wicked stuff that I've been learning about and just focus on being a mom, because I thought, I need to be cheerful and happy. I want to raise a happy child. But then all this evil was kind of like there was something culminating into something. And so I got up.
That's a good word. That's a good word, Paula. Culminate. That's the perfect word.
So I went around the back room and I stood behind him and I was watching it. And the guy was talking about the Muslims and the Jews and why there's so much fighting, which was something I always wondered about. And all of a sudden I got this very clear picture, just a really quick flash of the world, and God was on one side and Satan was on the other, and there was a battle for souls.
Wow.
And when I had that flash, I said, oh my God, you're real.
Wow.
And I just felt like falling flat on my face.
Yeah.
I was so ashamed for everything I had ever said about God and all the wicked things that I had said about him and how I bashed the Bible so much. And I thought, is this real? So I thought, okay, if I'm going to believe in this, I want to know every single word in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to read it. And, I left out a whole lot from this point, because at this point I was 36. And, when soul winners would come to my door and try to sell me the gospel, because that's what it seems like they're doing. I'd always be like, I don't see this good. They'd always try to sell the goodness of God, and God's so good and all this. And I'd be like, yeah, I don't see it. I see this world as crap. I see as people just are evil and they're selfish, and nobody's good. Where is this good? Why are there starving people on the other side of the world, and we're having hot dog eating contests in this country? Like, where is God in all this? And they would always say, oh, it's the sin of man or whatever. And I could buy that up to a point, because I saw that men were not good, that people in general just were not good. But I was like, no, there's something else. Until I get an explanation for all this evil, I can never believe in the good.
Right.
And so that's what had happened that day. God gave me an explanation for all the evil, and that it was a battle for souls.
In that moment, that flash that you described.
Right. And that did not come from me.
Right.
And the fact that I wanted to fall flat on my face, it was later when I started reading the Bible, I realized that men, when they came face to face with God, that's what they did. They fell on their face. And it's almost like you want to put your head below something that you're like, I don't know, like that's holy or something.
Yeah. So
I started to read the Bible the next day, and I got to chapter 2 where it says, and there was no man to till the earth. And I was like, wait, you just said that you made them male and female. Now you're saying there's no man to till the earth. Like, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to get through this, I need to just assume that this is true.
Right.
And if you are real and it is true, that someday you'll give me an explanation for it, because I'm not going to get through this thing if I stop at this. So I kept reading, and there were certain things that really shocked me about the Bible. I don't know what I thought it was before I started reading it, but I was shocked that it was about people.
Yeah.
You know, just regular people.
Yeah.
And then when I got to the law, I was like, are you kidding me? Who is going to even remember all the stuff to do it? Like, you're setting them up for failure already.
Yes. Yes, he is. He is trying to go for failure.
And the more I read, the more truths I started to see just from my own experience. And when I got to Ecclesiastes, I was so shocked that this was in the Bible. I never knew this book was in the Bible because it was like speaking to where I was. Like, that's how I felt, that everything was vain. Like, nothing mattered.
Yeah.
It was all for nothing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I could spend all day just on my revelations from the Bible, just things I was shocked about.
Well, you could hit on a couple of them if you want, Paul, and we'll take as much time as you need. I want to be respectful of your time, but don't not share something because you're worried about going too long.
Right. Well, the verse in Jeremiah that talks about the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. I was like, whoa, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And you're relating that to yourself.
Yeah. I realized that my heart had led me all over the place and it didn't know anything.
Yeah.
The part in the Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, I think it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding.
Wow.
And I was like, what do you mean? Why did you give me understanding if I'm not supposed to lean on it?
Right.
I'm not supposed to trust in it.
Yeah.
And the thing that shocked me the most was when I got to Corinthians, and it talked about the God of this world. And when I read that, I put it down and I was like, what did I just read? And I read a little commentary about what that meant. And the guy was saying, you know, it's a lowercase g, God of this world. And he's talking about Satan and how he is running things, basically. Yeah. And I was like, what?
What? Yeah.
How come I have never heard this in my life? How come none of these soul winners ever told me that the Bible says that Satan is the God of this world? That made everything make sense. Why everything was so evil. Like, I saw the world in not a good light. Nothing was good or fun about my younger years. So I always saw everything negatively.
Yeah.
So after I read the Bible, I was like, I just felt like this book had all of the answers I was ever looking for in my life. And I was, you know, I believed it as far as I knew.
Yeah.
So with my newfound knowledge, you know, I just thought I would get online and, you know, share my brilliance with everyone. Since we had, after I read the Bible.
Share your brilliance, Paula. Share your brilliance.
Well, that's what it does. That's what knowledge does. It puffs you up.
It sure does.
And after I read the Bible, actually, I told Mathias, I was like, you know, God talks a lot about fornicating, and it's not a good thing. So maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. And he, to my surprise, and he was coming to God in his own time, like, it was just weird that we were both coming to God at around the same time, because we're completely different and our stories are completely different. But he agreed. He's like, yeah, we shouldn't. So we decided that we would get married, but before that we wanted to get baptized, but before that we wanted to find a church that was preaching the truth. So when I started going to churches and talking to people, I realized that most people have never read the Bible. They don't even know what's in it.
They really don't.
And that added to my puffiness, my puffed up in my knowledge.
Yeah, because you knew, right? You knew some things that no one else knew, even about the state of the real world that we live in.
Right.
Yeah.
And it took us like a year and a half to find a church. So we went to a lot of different churches.
Mm-hmm.
And during this time, I decided to get online and, share this information with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I would run across atheist arguments that against the Bible that were logical, they were rational,
Mm-hmm.
they made sense. They would bring out certain contradictions, supposedly, in the Bible.
Sure.
And my heart would start racing, and I would start sweating a little bit, and I would think, am I believing a lie?
Right.
And it scared me to death. So I would research it. I would look into the two contradictions, or I would, listen to a sermon or read a commentary, or I'd just like pray about it. Like, what are you talking about here? Like, why doesn't this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And every time he seemed to give me the answer. I found the answer in scripture. There was a logical explanation of why this seemed like a contradiction, but it really wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like that feeling of thinking I believe something and then getting rattled a little bit and then saying, am I believing a lie? So I kept pushing myself. And I thought, the Bible says we ought to have an answer for every man.
Yeah.
And here I was, like, my 36 years prior to that was a God-hating atheist. And now I'm going to tell people that I believe the Bible now. I want to make sure this is real.
Yeah.
So I kept kind of pushing myself, and I kept looking into these things and these different forums where the atheists would go after the Christians and vice versa.
Sure.
And I ran across this article, and this guy was like, yeah, we're saved by grace through faith, but, you can lose your salvation or whatever. And he had just a list of all these verses
Mm-hmm.
that made it seem like you had to do something.
Yep.
And so I printed it out. And, at this point, Matthias was already teaching the true gospel. And it's not like I didn't believe it, but I kept having these thoughts like the world tells you that there's nothing in life for free.
Mm-hmm.
And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through these verses, each and every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to find a reasonable, possibility that it could not be talking about what it seems like it's talking about.
Right.
Except for one. There was one part in the book of Luke, the parable of the sower and the seed,
Mm-hmm.
where it says that some believed for a while.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, there it is. That proves to me that you can believe for a while and then you can stop believing, apparently. And so very soon after that, we were having a Bible study, and it was over, and we were all putting our chairs back and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody said something. I don't remember what they said, but I said, yeah, but what about the parable of the sower and the seed in the book of Luke? Some of those people believed for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend Joseph just stopped what he was doing, and he looked at me, and he opened the Bible, and he walked over to me, and he said, read this.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And it was Romans 10:9. And I was like, all right. So I read it. That if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. And I was like, that's it. I was like, why does it say believe in your heart?
Yeah.
I was like, is there any other way to believe? I was like, oh yeah, you can believe in your head.
Yeah.
So how do you get what's in your head into your heart?
Yeah.
And at this point, he was going somewhere else with it, but he saw that something happened and I was on to something. So he didn't say anything more about it. And that night I just could not sleep, and I laid in bed, and it was probably 3 a.m. I was tossing and turning. I was like going over these different verses, and I was like, well, you said this, and that, oh yeah, wait, no, you said this too. So that could explain that. I'm sort of working this out. And then all of a sudden, I was like, I get it. I get it. That's why you get all the glory.
Ding.
Because you did everything.
Yeah.
Because when I first read the Bible, I could be honest, when I got to Psalms, I was like, why? What is up with all this language? Like, I get it. You're good. You're God. You made everything.
Yeah.
What? There's 150 of these? What? I didn't get it. And in that moment, I was like, oh, I get the Psalms. Like, I get it. You do deserve all the glory.
Yeah, he does.
And right after that, there was a very loud, very crystal clear pop in my head. It was like a cartoon sounding pop.
Nice.
It didn't come from the room into my ears. It was
internal.
Something inside. And I was like, okay, either I've just had a stroke,
correct,
or I've been sealed into the day of redemption.
Oh, praise God.
And I didn't even know I knew that verse.
Wow.
And later I looked it up. It's mentioned like one time. So I got up to go to the bathroom just to make sure my arms and legs were working. And I got back to bed, and I was just, that's it.
That's it.
That was the rest.
Mm.
And the whole idea of the rest wasn't even prevalent. It wasn't even in my mind at the time. But as I kept reading the Bible over and over again, this rest would come up, and I was like, oh, that's what happened. I entered into the rest.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's my story. Wow. Basically, in a nutshell.
So in that rest after the pop, then, ever have any doubt? Ever struggle with doubt then after that?
No, never. No, it's not. When I read an objection about the Bible or some contradiction or something, not one bit do I wonder. It's the confidence is not of yourself. It's not coming from me.
Right.
Amen.
I could not have convinced myself of this.
Right. Even in your story, Paula, you are telling me things that you did. You know, you went to school for psychology, you did the acting, you moved to Texas, and you went to church. I mean, you did all these things that you did. But in all of it, I'm not hearing you say how you turned the light on, you decided to do this or that. You know, you even did a good job of explaining how some of the knowledge started to convalesce in your head, started to come together in your head, but it wasn't real to you until you had that pop, that final, as you say, you consider it being sealed to the day of redemption, and not even having known the verse. So that couldn't have come from you. It came from God.
Right. And it's not the pop that saves me. I just,
No.
I know that that's not what you're saying, but
Okay,
that's
good.
what some would say.
Yeah. You have to be very careful. And I learned that. It's one of the things I learned from being around Mathias so much. And it irritated me at first. Sometimes I would say something and Mathias go, well, just make sure that, and he would correct me. And I was okay being corrected. That's not the problem. But I was like, why are you being so particular about the way that things are said? But I came to understand why. Because there are people out there that don't know my heart, that don't know who I am. So if I say something a certain way, if I'm not particular about how I'm saying it, then people will take it wrong and they'll exploit that and twist it. And it's just unfortunate. But making
it was the understanding that was given to me. It wasn't even my own efforts of trying to figure this out,
right?
Because it is a puzzle.
Yeah.
The Old Testament, Daniel mentioned this verse the other day. The Old Testament says something about it's a vexation to even understand the report.
Yep.
And it's designed that way.
It is.
I don't think that you can understand it without God. And if you go about trying to understand it, that's where your wrong doctrine comes in.
Yeah.
That's where the leaven comes in. these, there's how many denominations of Christianity?
Lots. I don't know how many.
And I think that's a result of carnal men that have not been regenerated trying to go about understanding the Bible.
Right.
And they're going to be wrong. You can't get there without God.
Right.
And I know that sounds, I listen to a lot of Mathias's shows, and someone might say, well, that's Calvinist. That's Calvinistic to think that.
Sure.
But it's foolish to think that God has given you everything you've ever known in your life, including the air that you breathe. He's keeping your heart beating.
Yes,
He's
he
giving
is.
you your job, your spouse, your children, your family. He's given you everything.
Mhm.
It is foolish to believe that it's not also He who gives you this faith, who gives you this understanding.
Yeah. And do you think that it helps to understand the true nature of the world? That made it, at least from your story, it sounded like that was the beginning of that you being able to see the world for what it was. Helps you understand that anything good that you have, anything good in this world is indeed given to you by God.
Yeah, and I would also, I mean, I don't know that someone needs to know about all the evil.
Oh, yeah.
I had to know about it.
You did, yeah.
Right, because that's a lot of what I saw. I think that you just need to be, you need to understand the goodness of God. And I think it's really hard for us to believe that this God could be so good because there's really no frame of reference for how good He is.
No.
So it's almost unbelievable that He has done this for us when we didn't care about Him at all. When we were saying, like, He did this for me
While we were, yes.
before I even was born, before I even was able to blaspheme Him and do all this wicked stuff against Him.
That's
He
right.
did the thing for me, and it's almost hard to believe that someone can be that good. And I think that more people struggle with that than we think.
Mm-hmm. What would you say if you had a chance, Paul, to talk to those people you're referring to that struggle with that?
I've learned that there are surface issues with people, but I think the heart of the matter is buried. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, counsel in the heart of a man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. And how I take that to mean is counsel in your heart is what you're trusting in. And sometimes it takes a long time to pull that out of people, to see what they're trusting in. And these broadcasts that you guys do are great because the more someone talks, the more that you can see what they're trusting in. So I think it's great, but another verse that really shook me up was I don't know chapter and verse because I didn't go to Bible school, or I wasn't, so I know what it says, but I can't tell you where it's at. I can give you approximately where it's at.
Okay.
But it says, God resists the proud, but He gives grace unto the humble. And the whole time before, when I was searching for happiness or searching for meaning in life, I was very prideful. I was very proud. And I wasn't willing to humble myself, because humility is directly related to the word humiliating.
Yeah, it is.
And it's humiliating to admit that you were wrong about everything. And nobody in their right mind is going to want to be humiliated. It's almost as like the truth has to matter more to you than your pride. And I think that's why a lot of people won't get there, because it is humbling yourself to God. Those are the ones he gives grace to. As long as you're proud, he's not going to give you understanding. You can learn different things from different people, and you can add them to your preaching or whatever. But if your motivation is, oh, look at my knowledge, look what I know.
Yep.
You're not really going to have it, because you can continually say things all the time that you truly don't believe deep down.
Yep.
And you can easily fool yourself.
Yeah.
I did want to say one thing. I understand why people say, because I listen to some of this internet preaching and the community that everybody has their own channel and everything. And I get why they say, it's so simple to believe. And they're taking that from that verse that says that simplicity is in Christ.
Right.
Because it absolutely is. It is simple. Christ did it all.
Right.
But to get to that point is not simple.
No.
I mean, and especially with hanging out with church folk, it's kind of sometimes a lot harder for them, because they do have all this knowledge, because, they have been taught all these things of God. How would they not know that they really don't know him? Right.
How would you know that?
Right. And it's difficult to get to that part. There is a wrestling that happens with God.
Yeah.
And especially with good people. Like, I had a less hard time of accepting that I was bad and God was good.
Right.
And to not look at all the good stuff that I'd done. But man, it's funny. It's like the more gooder you are, the harder it is for you to see that you're not good.
That's right.
That you are bad. And I don't, the atheist argument is that, well, I can do good stuff. I don't need God. And I call BS on that. And I'll tell you why. Because when people go about to do good deeds, they're not doing it for the other person.
Nope.
They're doing it so they can pat themselves on the back.
Yeah.
Oh, look at what I did. What a good person I am. I am such a good person. I don't think anybody else would have done something like that.
Yeah.
I deserve a medal. Like, you're not doing it. True love and goodness is selfless. And we don't have any of that in us. If there's any good in anybody, it's God coming out of them.
Yeah. Amen.
And so it's funny how God has been able to change my past in such a way to now I used to be very bitter about how I was raised and the things that I dealt with.
Sure.
And now I'm just so grateful, because I was able to burn myself out in trying to figure out life and trying to find happiness or peace or whatever it is that we're searching for.
Yeah.
All these things that we're searching for to give us something.
Yeah.
It's all God, ultimately.
That's a better way of saying what I was trying to say earlier. That all good things come from God.
Right. It's all God. And if you continue on that path, it's going to lead you to God at some point. And at any point you can say, yeah, I don't want this. I'm not. And he's not gonna chase after you. Like, he's a gentleman.
Yeah.
And he's not gonna violate your free will. If you want to know him,
no,
you can know him. If you don't want to have anything to do with him, you're never gonna see him.
Getting back to one thing that you said, you're talking about that it's more difficult for people that count on their good deeds or how good they are. I found that to be true. And we have two examples, at least, probably more. If you ask Mathias, he would probably have more broadcasts where he's talked to someone like this. But even from Tuesday night, you have an assistant pastor and pastor that went for years, even preaching, and he wasn't saved. This is him saying it. It's not me saying it. It's him saying in his own testimony that he was doing that for years, thinking he was a good person, thinking he was preaching and quote unquote, and you said it earlier too, Why did the people that are out saving souls, why didn't they know it? And there's a lot that can be said about, well, because they're trying to put a notch on their Bible that they saved another soul. You hear it all the time. I'm going soul winning. Even the term can be misleading. So what is the intention of the person? But you have Daniel too, who was preaching, and from his own admission, he didn't get saved until later. So my point is, it's easy for people, especially if they've grown up in the church and had knowledge, and they're even telling others about it, to bring them to the point of humility, true humility, and for them to open up and drop the pride, which has been puffed up by their knowledge, and accept that. And in your case, and in many other cases, when someone doesn't have that, they don't have. I'm not saying you didn't have any pride. We all have pride. We're all born into a sinful world, and pride is a byproduct of that for sure. But having that different view of the world and different view of your childhood, it's difficult. It's difficult to humiliate yourself, but so necessary, because on top of that humiliation, on top of learning who God is and accepting the fact that you need him, that everything is impossible without him, and knowing that all good things come from him, especially in a broken, fallen world, you can embrace that, and you can spread that to others. And that's what we all hope to do. And we can't force anyone to do it. As you said, God's a gentleman. He's not gonna do that. He's not gonna chase after you. He's not gonna give you a hard time. He'll simply wait for you to, if you ever do, seek him. He does say, if you seek him, you'll find him. Seek him with your whole heart.
Right. It's not a decision that you make.
Right.
It's just not. If that were true, then I would have been saved at 16.
Yep.
When I accepted Jesus into my heart, whatever that means.
Yeah, at that table with the guy.
Right, at the Wendy's.
Yep.
I would have been saved then.
Yep.
But it's not some, magic spell or something.
Right.
Trust, which is what's required, we often use believe and trust interchangeably.
Yeah.
Trust has to be earned.
Mm-hmm.
When I had that vision of God and Satan on the other side of the world, and that there was a battle for souls, I believed that he exists, but I didn't know him. I knew nothing about him.
Right.
And there's a verse, I could look it up, but I probably messed it up. It says that whoever comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder to them who diligently seek him.
Yeah.
And to believe that God is to even get to the point where you believe he exists.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that point, he is a rewarder to them that diligently seek him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, I can imagine how many people, quote, fall away from the faith.
Yeah.
Because the only method of soul winning that the corporate church has ever come out with is trying to go out and get decisions for Christ.
Yep. Exactly. Walk down an aisle, raise your head up, and when the pastor looks at you, and the whole thing, go to the altar.
It almost makes it seem like it's some sort of spiritual thing that's going on when you do this thing this one time. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure it doesn't take long for that to unravel when someone who doesn't believe in God starts asking you questions.
Yep.
And it's not easy to get to that point, because, I've heard people say, like, you just have to believe the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4.
And so I guess if that's true, then, okay, well, then I don't need to believe that Jesus is God, right?
Right.
But you do, because otherwise, what difference does it make if there was a death, burial, and resurrection of some guy?
Yeah.
What difference does that make?
Any guy.
Any guy, right? Why couldn't I have just done that?
Mm-hmm.
You could have crucified me and then raised me up, and then I'd be good. Why did this guy take my place? The whole crux of the gospel hinges on that Jesus is God.
Right.
And that implies so much, because if Jesus is God, and the Bible says God cannot lie, then everything in the Bible has to be true.
Amen.
If one thing is wrong, then the whole thing is wrong. And this is how I thought about it. And to go that way and to admit that, could this be true? You can't just make yourself believe it. If you find yourself coming to believe it, it affected every single aspect of my life. Everything I thought about was changed.
Yep.
Everything was wrong, first of all, but the way I viewed the world, my relationship, my child rearing, politics.
Yeah. Oh, politics. Yeah.
Everything.
Everything
changed. And that's not easy. That's not simple. You can't just add this belief of the death, burial, and resurrection on to everything else that you believe.
Wow. That's
it
good.
Doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Because true belief you can't make yourself do it. You either believe something or you don't.
That's true. Now, I think this would be a good point, Paula, to tell the babysitting story to help people better understand the difference between really trusting and choosing to trust or deciding to trust.
Okay, so several years ago, we had an anniversary and we wanted to go out, and that's not something we do without the kids. We're always taking the kids with us. But we wanted to go out, and we knew someone who offered to babysit, and he was going to be watching our two kids and Mathias's dad, who had Parkinson's at the time, so he needed someone to watch him as well.
Right.
And I didn't really know him all that well, but I decided to trust him that night. I decided to trust him so that we could go out to dinner.
Right.
And I was not enjoying myself. I was a nervous wreck. We must have called the house like 4 times because I'm thinking like, what's happening? What is what's he doing? And and then not too long ago, Daniel took my kids out to Chili's or something, and then he took them to Chick-fil-A to run around and play, and they were gone for like 5 hours, but not once did I question or wonder what was happening. And it's because I trust Daniel, but it's only because I've known him for several years, and he's shown himself to be trustworthy.
Right.
But if you choose to trust something or someone, you don't.
Right.
Because if you did, it wouldn't be a choice. You just would trust them.
Yep.
And trust is earned. It takes time to learn that someone's not going to screw you over before you can actually trust them.
Yeah.
And the whole making yourself believe something, I mean, you can, I guess, you can make yourself believe something, but it's not a real belief. It's like these people who are born male and they choose to believe that they are female.
It's a good, another excellent point.
That's make believe. That's making yourself believe something. But I'm sure if you talk to these people long enough, they would have to admit that they, in fact, are not a female. I mean, you can only live with this make believe for so long. It's like, you know, the analogy of having a shipwrecked faith.
Right.
You can be on the water for months or years before you get shipwrecked. Yeah. But if Jesus is not the anchor to your soul, it's going to happen sooner or later.
Yeah.
You either fully believe and you fully trust, or you don't. And there's nothing wrong with it if you don't fully believe and fully trust. Just tell him.
Yeah.
Like
Take
that
it
guy
in.
said, Lord, I believe, help me with my unbelief.
Yes.
And the Old Testament says, come and let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. And when I read that, I was like, you want me to reason with you? Like, I had never heard that about God.
Yeah.
And that one verse that you mentioned earlier that says, seek me and you shall find me when you shall search for me with all your heart. I didn't know I was supposed to be seeking God.
Right.
I thought the way that Christianity goes about it is they go out and they preach this magic message of the gospel, and then people believe, they declare them saved, and then yay, you're a Christian.
Yeah, you're saved. Yay.
Right. Nothing about seeking God.
Right.
But it makes sense. I mean, you really have to dig. In this world, we're just saturated in all things Satan.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, it's his world we're living in, as far as not the natural world, but the world system that we live in.
Yep. It's all his.
And it's not going to take long for someone to question their faith.
No.
If they really aren't fully trusting. So.
Right. And once you fully trust, then you don't struggle with doubt, particularly about your salvation again.
No, because that's the effect of righteousness. The effect of righteousness is quietness and assurance forever.
There you go. I love that one.
The cause is righteousness, which you get only from Christ, being imputed with his righteousness. And the effect of that is quietness and assurance forever. I mean,
praise God. That was
if
awesome.
you don't have that, you haven't had the first thing.
Yeah.
And it's, you mentioned the guy the other day who was a pastor when he realized he wasn't saved. And when he was talking, his testimony was great, by the way.
I thought it was too.
It was great.
Yeah.
He was reading from, I think it was John 7. I could totally be wrong about that. But it was the part, no, it wasn't John. I think it was Acts. I'm sorry.
That's
but it was the part where he says that the Holy Spirit, it was right before Pentecost, and he said something like the Holy Spirit hadn't been given yet because Jesus had not been glorified yet.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, I just had a major revelation. I was like, wow, you could apply that to an individual.
You could, yeah.
That the Holy Spirit has not been given yet because Jesus has not yet been glorified.
Wow.
Jesus has to be glorified in all ways, in all points. You have to understand why he gets all the glory.
Yeah.
And then that's it. That's really it. It is simple, but to get to that point, it's not. You have so many other factors working against you. There's so much anti-God. Like, it's funny, after I read the Bible, and I loved how I was blessed to actually go into this and read this thing having no prior knowledge whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have my own ideas of what it meant, what it said.
Yep. You weren't fighting preordained ideas and concepts.
No, not at all. It was like a fresh look at it.
Yep. In some ways, I wish I would have had that. Now, I'm looking at my own life. I don't regret anything in the path that brought me to where I am now and who I am in him. But yeah, sometimes I used to look at hear other people's testimonies and go, I wish I had done that and done it that way. But we're unique. We're all unique, and our relationship with God is unique, despite what people tell you. He does have a relationship with each individual person. And so our stories are different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the way he wants it. That was one thing I thought was so strange about the Bible. If it was supposed to be written by the Holy Spirit, why each of these different books was so different. Yeah. And then God eventually showed me that they're different because people are different. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to have the same conclusion, but how you got there is going to be completely different.
That's it. The path that he takes you on, the path you walk on to get to that point is different.
Right. I used to think, like, when I first got saved, I used to think, oh, this person, they need to hear this. And if they knew this, they would believe. I was wrong.
Yeah, you find that out pretty quick, right? You
Right.
find that not everyone's head is the same nut to crack, for sure.
Right. And I think it's good in a way, actually, because it allows me to just take myself out of it and say, there's been times where I've seen God working and I'd be like, oh yeah, I see where you're going with this. I'm going to go ahead and help you out, God. I'll do you a solid.
As if he needs our help.
Right. And then it's like, I realize, oh no, what I was thinking was not what he was thinking. So it's helped me to just, not pre-plan anything and to just, I don't know what he's doing.
Right.
But if I just yield myself to him, he's going to use me however he's going to use me. And I think oftentimes we think, because it's natural to do so, we think, oh, I'm really good at this. So, I'll use my talents for God. But God is very different. He likes to use our weaknesses to glorify himself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because like with Moses, he wasn't a really good speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And God used him probably to show that it was God who was doing that. It wasn't Moses.
Mm-hmm.
He was just humble. He was allowing God to use him.
That's right.
And we can rebel against that and say, no, I'm not you. There have been times where the thing about the relationship is, I get mad at God sometimes and I'll tell him.
Yeah.
And, I'll complain and I'll be pissy. And then after a while, he just kind of shows me, you're wrong. You're wrong. And as long as I'm honest with him, we have a good relationship, which I would imagine is how a person would be to their earthly father.
Yeah.
So it's not all great. I mean, the things that God has me do, sometimes I'm just like, I can't do this. At one time he had me in such a pickle that I said, forget it. I'm not doing this. And I folded my arms and I was so mad. And I went into the bathroom to calm down. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. Forget it. I'm not doing it. He just said, come on now, Paula.
That's awesome.
But and also, like, I hear a lot of great, wonderful things about God. And while they're all true, it's like, I don't really hear a lot about the struggles that God allows us to go through. And I think that that's more real, because if he's conforming us to the image of his son, Jesus was a man of many sorrows. And I love this verse in Ecclesiastes. It says, sadness of the countenance, by the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some great benefit in the bad times, the sad times, the hard times.
Yeah.
That's how he tries us, like silver is tried,
Absolutely. His strength is made perfect in weakness.
In weakness, yeah. So
absolutely. Well, Paula, we're not going to keep you for much longer, but what I would like to do is ask the chat if they have any questions for you. If they don't, no problem. But I also want to ask Jen if she has any questions for you. Anything that you would like clarified anymore, Jen, or any questions?
No, I just want to say this has been a delight to listen to and to get to know you better and hear some similarities and hear some things that are different and just to connect. It's wonderful.
It is wonderful.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead, Paula.
No, I was just saying thank you.
I know, but I talked over you. I
don't do well with compliments and stuff. So.
Oh, I know. I know. It's like uncomfortable. You're like, forget about it.
How did this feel for you, Paula, as far as with nervousness and stuff? Was it as I promised, effortless? And
yeah, it was great. I mean, at first I was a little bit nervous, but it's just kind of like talking on the phone, I guess. If I don't look at the chat and I'm not paying attention, the way Mathias does it in his office, the camera on and it's showing him himself. And I told him, I was like, I cannot give a testimony while I'm looking at myself. Are you kidding me?
No,
I would be so self-conscious.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you didn't look at the chat, Paula. I'm glad you're just able to focus on what you were saying and didn't have that distraction. And I loved hearing from you. It was wonderful. I feel like you were as authentic as humanly possible, and I just am very grateful and humbled that you would decide this particular format to present your testimony for the first time. And a lot of positive feedback and comments from people in chat. And so we pray that anyone listening to the playback, that would be uplifting to them and edifying to them. Most of all, that they would see the truth in it. And hopefully that would minister to someone. And so do you have plans to use this kind of as an icebreaker, hopefully, to be more vocal? And I know you mentioned maybe going on Brother Luke's show eventually and doing that interview as well. Do you have plans of doing that more often?
I try not to make plans when it has to do with anything God related. I tell him, look, you set this up if you want me to do this, because if I get my hands on it, I'll mess it up.
Okay. Well, that's perfect.
And so, yeah, Luke had mentioned he wanted me to be on his, interview kind of thing. And I was like, well, I probably should do my testimony before that, because then it would just end up being mostly my testimony.
Right.
But I'm letting God decide that. So it's really up to him if he says, gives me the go ahead or not.
Perfect. I think that's a good way to go.
I do too.
Okay. Paul, that's it. That's it. It's over.
Yay!
Yay.
Not that it's over. No, I'm saying yay that you did such a good job.
You did do a good job, Paul, especially for being nervous and it being the first time. It was wonderful. And so thanks for coming and spending this time with us. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future if God would so lead you in that direction. And so there's a little bit of who Paula is. And we're very grateful for everyone that took time out of their day for this, odd time for us. We usually show up later in the evening. I was not expecting anyone to be in the chat, but we did have a few people that took the time to listen. And we're grateful for you guys. If you have any desire whatsoever to do a testimony and to use TSL to do that, please just send me an email to truestorylive.crips@gmail.com and let me know of your interest, and we'll try to schedule something. This is something we would like to do more often. We won't do it on the normally scheduled Sunday time. But we will find time during the week that doesn't compete with any of the other broadcasts, either Sin City Preacher or Talkin Doctrine. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you again on Sunday night for our normally scheduled broadcast. And with that, thank you again, Paula, and we appreciate you. So for the rest of you, God bless and take care. Good night.